Hello and welcome to this tutorial on how to use the 2D game engine GameMaker. This tutorial is intended for people who have never done any game development or design before, but are interested in finding out more about how to make 2D games. In this tutorial, I'm going to teach you how to make a top-down shooter using GameMaker's visual coding blocks, and hopefully you'll learn some of the key terminology about game engines, including objects, rooms, um, and sprites. So the first thing we need to do is load up GameMaker, and then in GameMaker we're going to click New, Game, and we're going to use a blank game template, and I'm going to click Let's Go. This loads up GameMaker's standard UI. In the center here we have the workspace, which is where anything we're going to edit will appear. On the left hand side we have Inspector. This is essentially the properties of any given object that we've got selected within the engine. On the right hand side we have the Asset Browser. So this is any graphics or any music or sound effects or even any objects that we're creating and game levels. They're all stored in the Asset Browser. And at the bottom here we have the console. So this shows us when our game is being compiled, any technical errors that we've got. I'm just going to resize my Asset Browser a little bit to make it a bit more easy to work with. So the first thing I'm going to teach you how to do is make a object for your game. So an object is any part of your game or anything within your game that essentially can impact the game. So it might be a coin that you pick up, it might be an enemy that's moving around, or it might even be the player themselves, what we would call the avatar. So under the assets, what I'm going to do is go down to where it says objects. I'm going to right click, I'm going to go create, and I'm going to create an object. Now this first object is going to be the avatar, the player, essentially, the object that the player controls. Under name, I'm going to rename it. And I'm going to call it avatar underscore obj. And the underscore obj means object. It's just a way to keep track of your different things that you're using within the game. The next thing I'm going to do is we need to add a graphic to it. So at the moment there's no graphic, which means essentially the player's character, as it were, is invisible, and we don't want that. So down underneath sprite essentially is the digital image that represents the player or any object within the game. So I'm going to click here where it says new sprite, and this is going to open up the sprite editor. Now it's a good idea to keep all of your different assets labeled and named in a way that makes sense to you, so you can quickly and easily track them down. So I'm going to call this avatar underscore SPR for sprite. Then I'm going to click edit image, which opens up the image editor. So in the center here, this checkerboard here is a transparent file. On the right hand side we've got brush settings, so I can select different sizes of brush, different shapes, colors that I can color my brushes. And then below here, we've got different tools. So at the moment, I've got my paintbrush, but I could have, for example, a draw rectangle tool. I could have an eraser for deleting stuff, a pipette to select the color. There's lots and lots of different tools. What I'm going to do is I'm going to create a very, very simple graphic of a spaceship for this tutorial. And I imagine you'll create much, much better graphics than I will. So I look forward to seeing those. And here we go. Like I say, very, very rudimentary. So now I've created my graphic for my avatar. What I'm going to do is I'm going to click the little X button to get rid of that. And it's going to take me back to my sprite. So I'm going to close that using that menu there. Then I'm going to scroll back up my workspace to the avatar object, but I could just also click avatar object. Now, if I scroll down my asset browser on the right, you'll see it's created a little sprite file at the bottom for that, but it's dropped it outside of any of the folders. So I'm going to pick that up, drag it into the sprites folder, and there we go. So the next thing I need to do is actually add some actions that mean that we can control the avatar so that the player at home can control it. And what I want to do is I want to add some movement controls using the W, A, S, and D keys on the keyboard, so the WASD keys. So the way we do that is we're going to create an event. Now, an event is essentially anything that happens within the game that changes the state of something. So the event I want to do, okay, is going to be a key event, and I want to use the keyboard buttons. So what we're going to do is go to key down, letters, and I'm going to use the W. Now it's come up saying here, okay, what's your preference? Do you want to do this in GameMaker language coding or with visual coding blocks? For this tutorial series, while you get used to GameMaker, we're going to use the GML visual coding blocks. So now that I've added the key down for the W key, okay, it's opened up an action. So essentially, this is what's going to happen when we press the W key. And what we want to do for this is, first of all, we want to set direction fixed. So you could scroll down the toolbox here to search for what you want, and what you want is set direction fixed. So the W key, when I press that, I'm going to want to go up, so I click the up arrow, and the other thing I want to do is set the speed. So at the moment we're not moving, so we've got a speed of 0. I'm going to have it so that when we press the W key, we move upwards at a speed of 3. Now I'm going to click the little X to get rid of that. So now that we've got a little bit of movement, I can go into my room. So a room essentially is a level in GameMaker terms. So games are made up of levels or parts of the world we can explore one at a time, where we've got an objective. So if I double click room 1, and it will bring up the room editor. I use the magnifying glass to zoom out. So we can see at the minute it's just a black empty stage. What we can do with this room is we can drag in objects. So I'm going to drag my avatar's object to the center. We can add backgrounds and all sorts of sounds and interesting things to our room. But at the moment, we've just got our little player's avatar, and that's it. Now, if I click the run button, which is the little triangle play icon up the top, we can test to see if the W event's working. So this loads up a little demo of our game. So if I press the W button now, we start to move up. But when I take my finger off the W button, we keep on moving. And that's because we've not actually told our avatar or the game what to do if we don't press a button. So once it starts moving, we haven't told it that it should stop moving if we release the keyboard button. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to Add Event, go to Key Down again, but this time I'm going to say No Key. So essentially I'm saying if no key is pressed down, I'm going to go back across over here, and I'm going to drag the set speed over. I'm going to say 0. So if no key is pressed, then set the speed to 0. And now what should happen is if we go back and run our game again, if I hold down W, it moves, and as soon as I let go, it stops moving. Perfect. So now we've got the basics of our movement set up. We need to add the same for the A, S, and D keys. Now, rather than going in and doing that all one at a time, what we can do instead is duplicate the W key down event. So now I'm going to go key down, and I'm going to duplicate it, but I'm going to do the A button this time, which is moving to left. Double click the A button, and just simply change the set direction fixed from up to the left. Again, let's do this now for the D button. So duplicate event for key down for D, and set direction to right. And now let's duplicate that again, key down, and this time it's going to be for the S button, which is moving down. There we go. So now if I click run, let's test this. So now I've got all of my movement. There you go. Perfect. So we can now control our avatar and move it around the game level, essentially. And there's lots of different ways that you can move your avatar. And as you get more and more into GameMaker, you find that there's some really interesting organic ways to add movement and vary how movement works. Okay, So now we've placed our object in the room, why don't we go back into that room and change the background of the room? Because at the moment it looks a little bit boring, because essentially we've just got a big black stage. So to do that, what we're going to do is we're going to actually change. Oh, first of all, let's go into sprites. I'm going to make a background image. So I've already downloaded an image that I want to use. So I'm going to go create sprite. I'm going to import an image. Now, I've already used Adobe Firefly to make this earlier. So important was, yes, let's import that in. So there's, and let's call this room underscore BG or room 1 BG. There we go. So perfect. And now if we go back into our room here. Amazing. Okay. So what we're going to do is go open editor. Going to go to our background by double clicking up here. Now at the moment we've got no sprite attached to our background. So what we want to do is click that. And we want to go for room 1 BG. There we go. And now we've added our own custom artwork in. Now, as you can see, it's not displayed the full picture. So we've got a couple of options that we can do here. First of all, we can tell it to stretch the image. So I'm going to click that and it stretches it out to fill the whole thing. We can actually tile it, or we can actually reset how big the image is using the options there. I'm just going to leave that as is for now. I think that's okay. I might just move it over a little bit. Let's just move that over -100, and let's move it up. Well, let's move it over -150. There we go. So I've got the planet in there. Perfect. So we've got a controllable avatar, so the player's in the room. We've got a background on our level. What we want to do now is we want to introduce an enemy. So let's create an enemy to add a bit more excitement to this game, because at the minute there's nothing much going on. So I'm going to create a new object again. So go to your asset browser, right click where it says objects and go create object. I'm going to call this object enemy underscore obj. Again, let's create a sprite for this. And let's edit the image. I'm just going to make a UFO looking thing. There we go. And like I say, your artwork will be much better than mine. Fantastic. Okay, so we've got our enemy objects there. So let's close that sprite editor down. Rename the sprite as enemy underscore SPR, just so it's easy to keep track of. And now let's go into our enemy object. So double click it over here under the asset browser. So we want to do a couple of things. First of all, let's get our enemy object moving about. So what we're going to do is we're going to go add event. Now what the event we're going to use to get our enemy moving is the create event. So essentially the create event means when this object first appears in a game room, the following things are going to happen. And the following things we want to happen is we want it to move in a random direction and at a certain speed. So let's drag speed on. So first of all, we'll set the speed to, let's set it to 4, so it's a bit faster than the player, which makes it a bit more dangerous. Next, we want to use a random direction. So I'm going to scroll down to the movement submenu. So you can see each of these little menus under the toolbox. Here we go. Set direction random. So this is what we want. So I'm going to drag that on above. And I'm going to tick the arrow directions that I want it to move randomly in. So I want it to move randomly, diagonally, either diagonally left and up, or right and up, or right and down, or left down. So let's go into our room now. So I'm going to double click room 1, and let's place an enemy object into the room. There we go. In fact, let's drag 3 of them in. Now let's hit the run button and let's see what happens with these enemy objects. Do they move randomly at a speed of 4? They do. Wonderful. However, it's exposed a problem because those enemy objects have actually disappeared off screen. So first of all, there's 2 problems there. Although we've told them to move in a random direction when they're created, they're just going to keep on moving in that direction forever. What we want to do is we want to tell the enemy object to move in a random direction when you're created, but after a second or 2 seconds, move in a different random direction. So for that to happen, what we need to do is we're going to use an alarm function. Think of an alarm as like a stopwatch. So I'm going to type alarm into the toolbox under the enemy object, and I'm going to click use set alarm countdown. Now it says set alarm 0 to 30. Now 30 essentially is 1 second. This is something that we call steps. There's 30 steps to a second. So I'm going to type in 60. So essentially I'm saying, right, when we create the enemy object, set it to move in a random direction according to these different parameters, set its speed at 4, and then 2 seconds later, set alarm 0 to go off. Now, if I go back across now to my events under my enemy object, I'm going to go add event, and I'm going to go alarm 0. So essentially, this is what happens when alarm 0 goes off. So when alarm 0 goes off, what we want it to do is move in a random direction again, a different random direction, at the same speed. I'm going to go back into my create event rather than retyping out or redoing all of those coding blocks. I'm going to select all 3 of those there, and I'm going to go Command C or Control C if you're on PC, and I'm going to copy them in. Double click on alarm 0, double click over here, and I've gone Command V or Control C if you're on PC. And essentially I'm saying, right, when alarm 0 goes off, just move in a different random direction, still at a speed of 4, and then again set the alarm to go off in another 2 seconds. And what that should mean is every 2 seconds, the enemy is going to move in a different random direction. There we go. Wonderful. And we can see they keep moving and changing directions. We've still got a second problem. And the second problem is that those enemies are disappearing off the screen. So what we need to do is we need to find some way to keep all the objects within the room's level. And the way we're going to do this is we're going to build an invisible wall. So I'm going to right click objects. I'm going to go create object. I'm going to call it wall. I'm going to click the new sprite button. I'm going to edit the image, and then I'm going to select any kind of crazy garish color that I can really see. I'm going to use the paint bucket tool to fill that whole thing. Okay, then I'm going to close down that sprite, rename it wall sprite or SPR, and then I'm going to go into my wall object. And I'm going to tick solid. Okay, perfect. So what we need to do now is we've got this wall object that's solid. What we're going to do is we're going to go into our room and we're going to tile the wall object in here. So if I drag my wall object over here, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold down the option button on my Mac, and I'm going to click, and with the option button held down and my left mouse button clicked down, I'm going to draw this wall all around the edge of my room. Now, if I get any pieces wrong, I can just select the bits of wall I want, and I'm using the delete key on my keyboard just because there's no sense having things in here that we don't actually need. So now we've got this wall here. Okay, the wall is solid, but what we need to do essentially is we need to go into the enemy and we need to tell it that if it collides with the wall, essentially just to bounce away. So let's go into our enemy object and we're going to go add event. So we're going to say this is a collision event. So when we collide with, and it says objects, so when the enemy collides with the wall, and then what we want it to do is we're going to go down to movement, and we want it to reverse the direction it's moving in. Easy peasy. So let's run this and let's see how that's looking now. There we go. So now they can't actually get out of the level, which is good. And perfect. Okay. So there's a couple of interesting things going on there. They keep catching on the wall and it doesn't look great. So what I'm going to do to try and help that is I'm going to go over to my enemy object here. I'm going to toggle the preview down. And what I want to do is I want to use the collision mask. So here where it says collision mask, I'm going to click same as sprite here. Click the little icon that brings it up. And under collision mask here, we're going to go ellipsis. And that's essentially just going to make a little round image there. So the collision mask essentially is how the computer works out how things collide with one another. So we're going to make ours a little bit more precise to stop it sticking. And we're going to close that down. And hopefully next time we run it, they won't get quite as stuck on there. So we've got our wall. We can see it at the moment, which looks hideous. So what we're going to do is double click the wall object and tick visible off. And then the wall will still be there. We just won't be able to see it. So if I run it now, that horrible yellow stuff should have disappeared. There we go. And our UFOs aren't getting quite as stuck so far. Excellent. Okay, so we need to tell it though to do a couple of interesting things. So first of all, let's introduce a live system for our avatar. So we're going to say that when our avatar collides with the enemy, essentially we want to lose a life. For that to happen, we need to make a create event for our avatar. So I'm going to go create up here. Under toolbox, I'm going to search lives and I'm going to drag the set lives option onto there. And essentially what we're saying here is when the game starts or when the avatar is first made, how many lives do you want it to have? We'll give our avatar 3 lives. And next thing that we need to do is we need to say when we collide with the enemy, let's make our lives go down. So again, set lives, drag it over. This time we're going to type -1 and we're going to tick relative. And what that means is when we collide with the enemy, take one of our lives off us relative to what we've already got. So if we had 3 lives and we collide with an enemy, we should now have 2 lives. We also want to make sure that when the enemy object collides with us, it destroys the enemy object and it disappears so that it doesn't create any issues. So I'm going to double click my enemy objects and we're going to add a collision event to this. I'm going to go collide with avatar. So when we collide with the avatar, and we want to destroy ourselves essentially. So if I type destroy and we got destroy instance, drag over. So essentially what that's saying is when the enemy object collides with the player, the enemy object is destroyed. Now, that's good, but actually it's not very challenging. So what we want to do is we want that to happen, but we also want to make a couple of new enemies for every time we destroy an enemy as well, just to keep it challenging. So I'm going to type in instance, and we want create instance, drag that over. The object we want to create when the avatar collides with the enemy ship is a new enemy object. We're just going to type in random X for the and random Y under here. And that's basically saying that we want the enemy object to appear at a random location in the room. And let's make a couple of new enemies for every time. There we go. So I just literally highlighted that and went Command C and Command V. So let's run our game and let's see that if we collide with the enemy, it destroys the enemy and it should make 2 new enemies. Yes. So every time we're colliding, if you see, we're making 2 new enemies. But what about our lives? We've not died and I can't see our lives being displayed anywhere. So what that is we still need to tell GameMaker to actually show us what our lives are. So if we go back into Avatar Object, this time what we're going to do is we're going to go Add Event and we're going to make a Draw Event. So a Draw Event is kind of any event that's meant to show something on the screen, normally to do with the GUI. So I'm going to go Draw, and let's go Draw, Lives, and we drag this over, Draw Instant Lives. Now at the moment, the sprite is set to no one. So I'm going to click this here. And that's because we don't actually have a sprite for our lives. So let's remedy that. So let's go into our sprites over here, right click, go create, sprite, and we'll call this lives spr, edit the image, just make a really simple lives kind of image. So I'm just going to go, ooh, that's a terrible heart. There we go. So we've now got our live sprite. Let's close that down. Go back into our avatar. Go back into our draw option. And under draw instant lives now, we should be able to find our live sprite. There we go. Now it's telling us, where do you want to draw the live sprite? X and Y essentially are coordinates in the room. And X and Y 0, 0 are top left hand corner. So I'm just going to make this like, I don't know, -100. And we'll play around with these ends to get them exactly right. So let's test this and hopefully we should be able to see our lives. So there we can see one of our lives, but where's the player gone? So the player is actually invisible now. And that's a bit of a quirky GameMaker. What we need to do is we need to tell it to draw itself as well. So whenever you use the draw function, you always have to do draw self first. And draw self means, as well as drawing the lives, still show us where we are. I'm going to tick relative 0 and 100. Now, relative means that it's going to draw the lives 100 pixels away from where my avatar is. So if we go back in now, see the 3 lives icons are moving with me? But it looks quite jarring, doesn't it? So we're going to untick relative. And then run it again. And there we go, there's our 3 lives. So, and now we're going down to 2 lives. We can see when we hit an enemy, 1 life, 0 lives. But we've not died. And that's because we need to tell it that we need to die if we run out of lives. So, to do this, we're going to go back into our avatar. And essentially we need to say, when we collide with the enemy, we want to test the lives. And over here, whoopsie daisy, we've got if lives. So this is what we're going to use. So drag if lives over. And what we want to say is, if lives are equal or less or equal than 1, then what we want to say is the room restarts. So I'm going to go over room here. There's a room restart button. Now, if I was to drag this beneath here, then every single time that we got hit by the enemy, it'd restart the room. Instead, what you need to do is drag it to the right of the if lives question. What that means is that will only restart the room if this comes out to be true. So if we hit the enemy and our lives are less or equal to 1, it will restart the room. If it's more than 1, then it will set lives to -1. So let's give that a little test now. So we're testing to see if our live system works here. So we're down to 2 lives, 1 life, and this should restart the game now. And there we go, it's restarted the game. We're back to having the original 3, and we've gone back up to 3 lives. So, good rule of thumb with GameMaker or any game engine, always save your project as you go along. So I'm going to hit the save button a few times now. So, we've got enemies that move around. We've got a live system that if we hit the enemies, our lives go down. We've got it so that, essentially, if we run out of lives, the game's over and we have to restart the game. Let's try and make it a little bit more interesting. So let's add a bullet system to our game so that the player can fire bullets at the UFOs to destroy them before they get near to them. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a new object, the bullet object. So again, go to your objects, right click, go create object. Let's make a new sprite just like we did before. Let's edit our image. Let's make a bullet. There we go. So we've got a simple bullet there. Let's close down that sprite. I'm going to call it, again, always have a good naming system, so bullet SPR. Let's get back into our bullet object. Let's name this now bullet object as well, because we didn't name this one. We've got our sprite, and wonderful. So what we need to do is we need to tell our bullet to move, essentially, when it's created. So as when it's created, let's go create. So when we're created and we want to set the direction. So let's move down to scroll down to our movement options, set direction. Drag that over. Now you see here, I've gone set direction variable, and that's for a good reason. What I want to do for this one is I want to essentially set it to move to whatever direction I'm kind of pointing to. So for that, what we're going to do is we're going to type in our avatar's name. So whatever your avatar object's name is, so mine is avatar underscore obj, type that out, and then type dot image underscore angle. So essentially, I'm saying to move in the direction of my avatar object, in the direction that my avatar object's image is facing. And again, we need to set the speed. So I'm going to set the speed, and as it's bullet, we best make it go pretty quick. So I'm going to set the speed to 8. So what I'm saying is when my bullet is created, I want it to move in the direction that my avatar object is facing at a speed of 8. Okay. Now, in terms of how we actually create it, let's go into our avatar object. I'm going to use a mouse click. I'm going to say, right, if we click the left button on our mouse, we're going to fire a bullet. To do that, go to mouse, global, and go global left down. And then we scroll over. And we want to create an instance. So we go create instance. And what instance do we want to create? We want to create the bullet object. And we want to tick relative for the X and Y because we want to create the bullet object wherever we are and the coordinates, and it's going to go to the instances layer of our game room. Right, let's give this a little test then. So it should be a case that when I click the left button now on my mouse, it creates a bullet, which it has. There we go. Wonderful. Now, the only problem is that my bullet's only firing to the left, and we haven't actually told it what to do if the bullet collides with a UFO. So at the moment, it's not doing anything interesting. So, first of all, let's fix the direction that we're firing. So, what we're going to do now is we're going to say, right, we can now turn our avatar object around, so we can spin our spaceship around. So to do that, we're going to create a step event. So create and step under our avatar. And we're actually going to use a little bit of code here. So I'm going to type code in, and we'll use execute code block. So this piece of code is going to tell our GameMaker to essentially make our avatar object face whatever direction the mouse is pointing. So for that to happen, what we're going to do is we're going to go, we're going to type image underscore angle, and then we're going to go equals, and then we're going to type point dot direction. Oh, no, point underscore direction. And we're going to go x, y, mouse underscore x, comma, mouse underscore y. So image underscore angle equals point underscore direction, open brackets, x comma y comma, mouse underscore x comma, mouse underscore y, close brackets. And essentially what we're saying there is make the image angle, the angle we're facing, essentially whatever direction the mouse is pointing at. So point towards where the mouse is on the screen. So I'm going to hit the save button now. And now we can see wherever I turn my mouse, essentially, there we go. Now we've got a problem though. See that laser's appearing over to the right of my object. It's fine when it's there, but when I move around, it's not quite right. So that's because we haven't set the origin point of our sprites properly. So I'm going to open up my avatar sprite. So I'm going to double click avatar sprite down the bottom. And then over on the left hand side under the inspector, you see here it says origin X, Y, and it's got a drop down menu. Always have middle center. So essentially it's putting it right in the center of where your avatar is. And if you're unsure, it's this little crosshair thing there. So let's do that with the enemy as well. So close that down. Origin, middle center. Let's do that with a bullet sprite. Origin, middle center. There we go. And we should do it really with the wall and the lives as well. Let's set the lives middle center. There we go. So let's save that. Imagine you've got a picture on a table and you stuck a pin through it, and then you try to turn the picture. Wherever the pin is the center point that it spins around. That's what the origin point is. So now we've got our spaceship. Looking pretty good. We can move around, we can fire, but again, still nothing's happening when the bullets hit the enemy's kind of object. So let's change that. Let's close that down. So what we need to do is we essentially need to make a collision between the bullet and the enemy object. So let's go up to my objects, go to the enemy object, double click it, and we're going to say, right, add event. Let's make a collision event with the object bullet. And this is going to be nice and easy. Let's just copy what we said to do if we hit the avatar, which is destroy ourselves, but make 2 new copies of ourselves. So I'm going to hold down Shift to highlight all 3 of those, go Command C, and go back into bullet object and Command V. So now we're saying, right, if the bullet hits us, destroy ourselves, but 2 new copies of ourselves that spawn randomly. Let's try it. There we go. Now, see these ones that have appeared up here? They've spawned right into where the wall is. So, let's go back into our room. And let's just move that wall object out. There we go. Because we're never going to spawn any objects outside of the room. And in fact, oop, a little bit fiddly. And we can figure that out later, in fact. I won't get too hung up on doing it properly now. So the only other thing we could do next would be to add a score system and to make our graphics look a bit more fancy-dancy than they do at the moment. One thing that was bugging me a little bit was to do with the bullet. So I'm going to change how my bullet works. So instead of global left down, I'm going to change that event for when we press the left mouse button, we fire a bullet. So instead of left down, I'm going to go left pressed. Mouse, global, left released. In fact, let's do that. So essentially I'd have to take my finger off the mouse for it to fire. There we go. Now, let's go into my bullet object. And I'm going to add another code block here, just because. And I'm just going to say image angle, so the angle it's facing at equals avatar underscore obj dot image angle. And essentially what I'm saying here is the bullet should be facing the angle that the avatar is facing. There we go. That's much better. Okay, there's one more thing we need to do. So it feels a little static with my spaceship just kind of floating around here. When I let go of the key, the fact it does nothing feels a little bit static. So what we're going to do is we're going to go into the avatar object. We're going to go into the key down where we told it stop moving if we're not pressing anything. And instead, we're going to set it to a speed of 2, which is essentially less than if we're pressing a button. So it'll keep on kind of floating in the direction it's moving until we move in another direction with the keypads. So let's give this a try. There we go, and that's much better now. So it feels a bit more organic now. Fantastic. There we go, much better.